endured ever since. I mean, it's the first text you read if you're doing a biology degree.
Isn't it the beginning of bureaucracy? Classification?
Well, except that what Aristotle was really trying to do was to get people through the sciences to find the moment of whole knowledge, which is when you have the aha moment of enlightenment. So yes, I mean, some lesser mortals get stuck in all that, but you know, if you persevere with this, as Plato said in the Symposium, or Diotimid, if you keep walking, you come through to the absolute beauty. Because all these classifications, they're fascinating, and animals are fascinating. You can spend your whole life, and some people spend their entire life just classifying insects or classifying a particular type of frog and do PhDs on it. Fine, but what I think Plato would say is, let's move on and go up to the next level and find the form of absolute beauty, which is reflected in all these animals, you know. And ultimately and the later Neoplatonic tradition, Plotinus and co, said the beauty of all these animals is their ability to manifest the divine beauty. So we look and see a beautiful cat and feel she's lovely because she is a manifestation of that primal beauty. And the same with people. Beautiful people, their souls are manifestations of that. There's a sad thing, we don't really have all of Aristotle's work. We only have lecture notes for his more exoteric teachings. And I believe, well, I'm not alone in saying this, that there was an esoteric canon which has been lost. And he used to teach orally, walking around the grounds. That's why they're called peripatetics. And that's been lost, you know. But I believe it can be rediscovered because I've studied Tibetan Buddhism and I believe in termas. You can download Aristotle's esoteric teachings if you look into it and you pray and you practice, let's call it strategic piety. I've been to the grounds of the Lyceum where Aristotle taught, you know, and I've tried to download that. Interestingly, when I worked at the Rudolf Steiner library in London in my 20s, I discovered there's been some people in the Steiner world of anthroposophy that claim that Steiner himself was some kind of a friend of Aristotle, interesting in a former life, and that other people in the anthroposophical movement, you know, they're the reincarnations of certain famous intellectuals around at that time. I don't know, I suspend judgment, but I suppose they've got to go somewhere, haven't they? I mean, that's a level of biology that's being touched on by my friend Rupert Sheldrake, who's talking about the morphogenetic fields that surround the physical body. Most biologists only look at the cells and the physical body. Rupert says you can't ignore the spiritual side of the human form, and that's what he calls a morphogenetic field, which is other people would call it the astral body that surrounds the physical body. And there's a whole interesting developments in modern biology looking at all that stuff. My friend David Lorimer, who runs the Scientific and Medical Network, is always having people speaking about research into that. And it goes back to Mesmer, who was exploring what he called animal magnetism. He thought that physical body issues a certain energy field which the healer can work with. And he got amazing results. He was Austrian. And, you know, it's still up for study. Alexander von Humboldt was another great thinker in this field. In the Islamic world, Ibn Sina wrote a lot about biology. And, of course, in Britain, Charles Darwin became the authoritative explainer of evolution. But I don't think he did. He told the full story. I think that he left out some of the key elements of the evolutionary story. And I've always been much more fond of Alfred Russel Wallace, who was his rival, if you want, although they were friends. And they co-discovered the theory of natural selection, evolution by natural selection. But Wallace believed in a spiritual aspect to that. And he became a spiritualist. He went to the church in Bournemouth, and I've been to his graveside. I organised an Alfred Russel Wallace lecture at Poole Grammar School when I taught there, and we toasted him with sherry one evening, twice, 2 years running, and had lectures by spiritualists talking about science and evolution. And I like to think of the phrase supernatural selection. There's natural selection, which is the physical form and all that, but then there's, when you fall in love with somebody, that's supernatural selection. And that's like marriages made in heaven, and I think that's what the soul does. And there's nothing in Darwin that can explain that. When, the higher sensitivity of human nature, I think, is open to supernatural selection. And I think that's to do with the mystery of love. And biologists are just beginning to talk about this now. If you look at Scientific and Medical Network and their equivalents. So it's exciting. And yes, there are legalists in biology who still are reductionists, who are strict materialists, say everything is caused by genes, Richard Dawkins types, and you have them in France as well. But Cédric Villani, a great mathematician in France here, is very interested in Henri Poincaré, who was a great French scientist and polymath. I think these people, within the French intellectual tradition, they're interested in these bigger questions, which point to mystery. I mean, Aristotle said all philosophy begins with wonder, thavma, and I think that's true. So let's keep wondering. Let's not close the conversation. This was the mistake of vulgar Marxists who said, "Oh no discussion of spirit. It's all outlawed. Everything's material." Well, no, it's not. It's not that simple. I think if Marx and Engels were alive now, they realise things are a lot more complicated than they thought. Capital's doing very funny stuff, and it needs reining in, because it's in the hands of a lot of bad people often. But for that we need morality, we need ethics, and that can only come from the spirit, as Kant said. So anyway, there we are. Those are our two tonight. They're both very interesting, I think. Gosh, right. Now, we don't have long, so I'm going to do something slightly different today. We'll finish by looking at the universal calendar of saints and sages, which is something I do every day, but I didn't do it today. I saved it. And today is is it the 11th or the 12th of May?
12th.
Today's the 12th, yeah. So I'm going to look up who are our saints and sages today and show people how this works. Page 59. Right, so today, there's each day of the year, 365 days, there's 12 saints and sages from each of the traditions. And I've developed this initially as a teacher in schools. I would start a lesson with the saint of the day. And it's a good way to learn about geography, history, languages, different religions. And then I thought, let's not just have Christian saints, let's have Buddhist, Hindu, Jewish, and their equivalent. And there aren't saints in all the traditions, but there are sages. There's no official thing in Taoism whereby you're declared a saint. The Christian Catholics sort of made it more formal, which is the bureaucracy thing. To become a saint in the church, you have to pass all these tests. You have to have miracles at your tomb and healings and all that stuff. There's nothing wrong with that, but but other religions chose not to go down that route. In the Jewish tradition, there's no official saint thing, but people are recognised as Hasids, charismatic spiritual elders. Okay, so we've got the first column is that of women. Today we celebrate the life of Marianne Heinisch, who was an Austrian feminist. We have the next column is for Freemasons, and we celebrate Axel de Fersen, 1754 to 1810. He was a Swedish count, and he was privileged for his friendship with Queen Marie Antoinette. And he was a great fan of Marie Antoinette friend of hers, and he tried to protect her. He also had fought on the side of the Americans during their War of Independence. So he was a friend of Washington and Thomas Jefferson. He didn't agree with the persecution of the royal family. He thought the revolution had gone too far. He agreed with the revolution, like in America, but the mobs cruising around Paris, killing aristocrats, he didn't like that. And he did his best to protect Marie Antoinette. And of course he failed because she was executed and humiliated. And I think it was shocking what was done to her. I mean, it wasn't her fault she'd been born into a royal family in Austria. You know, so anyway, good man, I think, this chap. Then we come to R.B. Onions, who wrote a fascinating book in 1951 called The Origin of European Thought. And he traced it back to the ancient Neolithic and Bronze Age. And he looks at the origin of words, he looks at archaeology, and he looks at how we think in opposites, light, dark, sort of Heraclitus stuff. It was a very speculative, daring, interesting study that he did, way ahead of his time. He was an etymologist as well, I think, and did a dictionary of English etymology. Yeah, I think an Oxford man. So we've got him in the esoteric column. Then we come to our Indian from the Jain community, and this is the Emperor Chandragupta Maurya, ruled 321 to 297 BC, and he was the emperor of northern India, and it's said that he became a Jain at the end of his life and renounced the empire, and he went to live in the forests. That's kind of like Alexander the First did. It's the same story, in fact. And he went to live in the very south of India. I've been to both the north and the south of India. By the way, I'm also been very busy this week on the way that Modi is trying to steal the election, demonising his opponents, using terrible language and misusing the apparatus of the state. He's backed up by this neo-fascist bunch called the RSS, who are going around terrorising and beating people up. They're not allowing people to register for their votes. They're not allowing them to vote. I'm on the panel of people monitoring the Indian elections. It's shocking, the stories that are coming in. Modi is a really criminal guy, actually. But because he's the chief of the land, nobody can touch him. He's appointed the Supreme Court, so they won't say anything. He's appointed the Electoral Commission, so they won't say anything. But finally they're beginning to. They're waking up. The Electoral Commission ordered the release of one of the leading Indian opposition leaders who was in prison. He's the mayor or the leader of Delhi, a great city that I know and love. He's been finally let out of prison. And he's denouncing Modi. He's saying the guy's a criminal, which he is. And my friend Rahul Gandhi, who's the leader of the Congress party against Modi, has got Modi to agree to a debate. It'll be televised, 1-to-1. Rahul will win hands down. I mean, Modi is an anti-intellectual, fanatic, with false thinking. And whereas Rahul is a properly trained, educated, wise, humble, genuine thinker in the tradition of Gandhi and his great-grandfather Nehru. And so, yeah, and Rahul Gandhi, has said Modi wants to be like a king. He's a despot who wants the power to arrest and execute anyone that he doesn't agree with. Well, that's not according to the Indian Constitution. Thank God. And the Constitution has to stand firm against this man he's done a Trump. He's sort of tried to take over the entire body politic of India from within by penetrating it. And that's the deliberate policy of the RSS, this fascist group. They've done a Trump. I don't believe they're going to win. I think the Indian people are wise. They're going to see through this and realise that's not India. Anyway, Chandragupta would certainly say that's ridiculous. And he did an Alexander. He resigned rather than, you know, power's only lasts a little while. Spiritual power is eternal, so it's best to invest in that, is what Alexander I and Chandragupta realised. And he, you know, he retired. And then we have, well, this is interesting. For Chinese thought, today we have Confucius, who was 551 to 479 BC. And we honoured him earlier, we talked about Confucius. I've always loved Confucius as an intellectual. He was a genius. He did a sort of Aristotle to Lao Tzu, just as Aristotle did to Plato. So Confucius did to Lao Tzu, who was the mystic, who could just, like, you know, float on the wind and you know, explore the universe. Confucius said, okay, thanks for that, but let's try and ground this. How should I run my family? You know, what should I do for a living? How can I ethically earn a salary? How should a ruler rule a state ethically? Not with Modi tactics or Hitler tactics. So what's a good state? How would that be run? And so Confucius did the Aristotle thing for China, and his works are brilliant. I've read them all, not in Chinese, unfortunately. I haven't had time to learn Chinese, but he was from the spring and autumn period of Chinese history, and he wanted to see the link between personal morality and the affairs of the state. He said there is a link, and he was friends with some of these rulers of the little states of China. It was before the whole thing was unified into one big empire, which was done by the legalist chap. This was when there were several kingdoms, and so Confucius went between them, and they were usually at war with each other, and Confucius was trying to tell them not to fight. He was doing a peace philosophy thing. And then when the legalists stole power, he was then persona non grata. He was, you know, his works were forbidden, they were burned. And the emperor tried to kill everyone that remembered his works. But fortunately, some survived, and they wrote them down again. And therefore the corpus has survived, which is a miracle. And if you haven't read Confucius Analects, do so. He was born in the village of Zhu in the state of Lu, representing Shandong province at the moment. He was a descendant of the noble Kung clan. His original name was Kung Ju, later changed to Kung Fu Tzu, which in Latin we made into Confucius. When the Jesuits from France went to China, they learned Chinese and they studied Confucius and they translated it into Latin, and they learned Taoism and they translated the I Ching, and it was a real exciting thing that happened here in Europe. And that's what Leibniz got the idea for his mathematical system. Okay, so we also celebrate today our Jewish intellectual, Arthur Liebert, 1876 and 1946. We celebrate a Sufi, Bibi Kamal Khatun, a Sufi woman and a saint from India. For pagans, we celebrate Dido of Carthage. She was a Phoenician woman that Dido, the great Trojan hero, fell in love with, according to Virgil, on his way to Italy. And Purcell wrote a great opera. Now, I think she was historically a proper person, so she's in the dictionary. She's a sad story because she committed suicide, but Aeneas left her. But it's an interesting story. I don't know anyone's ever done a critical study of Virgil and like the details of where he got his text, where the ideas came from, and what was the historical basis of them. I'm sure some Latinists have. I haven't got a copy. Then we celebrate Sir Alexander Fleming for science, who was a bacteriologist, discoverer of penicillin at St Mary's Hospital in London, near where I used to live, and a Freemason, actually. We then celebrate the Hindu, Eknath, 16th century Hindu saint. And for Buddhists, we celebrate today Khenpo Ngawang Palzang, who was from the Tibetan Buddhist traditions. From a child, he had miraculous powers and had visions of deities. And he was taken to a monastery by his mother, and it was obvious he was right at home, and he was given certain tests, and they decided he was the reincarnation of one of their lamas, and he was initiated into the higher secrets of Tibetan Buddhism. This is all happening in the early 1900s. And then finally we come to Christians, and today we celebrate Ethelhard, Saint Fremund, Saint Nereus and Achilles, Saint Pancras of Rome, and for Protestants we celebrate Gladstone, William Ewart Gladstone, who was the key figure in the Liberal Party in British history. He was a liberal intellectually, like me, in that he believed in freedom of thought. He was opposed to the Tory Party, which was trying to get us back into like the Dark Ages, clamping down on freedom of thought. They used the French Revolution as an excuse to silence the right to freedom. They went too far, the Tories, and they persecuted intellectuals. They, enacted very draconian laws. And Gladstone said, no, let's not do that. The best of the British character is a belief in freedom and fair play and justice and truth. And he was an amazing man. I've got a book of his sayings, and he was inspired by Christianity. He was an Anglican, like me, and when he died, he was 4 times Prime Minister. He was Prime Minister longer than any other British statesman. My grandparents liked him, it's that generation, right? He wanted to bring in things like pensions and respect for the elderly. He was the sort of ancestor of the welfare state, in effect. And when he died, he left his huge library. He was privately a great scholar. He loved studying all of Christianity and the classics. He was a Latinist and a Greek scholar. He was a friend of Schliemann, the discoverer of Troy. And he left his library of thousands and thousands of books to the nation. It's still there, St Daniel's Library. You can go and book a retreat there and spend a week studying, which I did. I organised a conference there after 9/11 on the educational implications of 9/11. And I saw the great chair in which Gladstone, this is Gladstone's house, but he converted it into a library. And to me, that's the mark of a man, is to leave their library to the nation for the advancement of divine learning. It's a charity, and a lot of vicars go there. It's the only time I've ever seen the complete works of Luther, for instance, on the open shelves in Gladstone's library. He was a scholar at that level, and he also had all of Thomas Aquinas and the Catholics. He wanted to emancipate the Catholics of Ireland because he believed in fair play, so if they want to be Catholic, let them be Catholic. If you want to be a Protestant, that's fine. That's called religious freedom. And unfortunately, he was way ahead of his time, really, because he'd be turning in his grave at this Tory government ruling in England. They've destroyed a lot of the liberties that my generation took for granted. And fortunately, they look like they're going to lose the next election. So Gladstone is in as a sage. I don't think he qualifies as a saint. He was a Protestant, so he's not an official saint, but he's a sage. And he was doing a Confucius thing. He was trying to find out how to rule a government ethically. Great speech maker in Parliament as well. His oratory was first class. So we need statesmen like him back, in my opinion. Anyway, that's today's trawl of sages. I think they're a good bunch myself. This is the Universal Calendar of Saints and Sages, and you get a list like that for each day of the year. And it could be a really good educational tool for like a study group or something, or an interfaith group, to get hold of and do it, Okay, any questions? We'll stop in a minute because we're running out of time, I think.
That would be good to get that online.
It is. I can send a PDF to people if they want. But I like the book, it's good to have a book and not just screens, I think. Anyway, we'll finish there. Thank you. And a lot to think about. Yeah.